On July 3rd, 1992, 35-year-old George Decker was cooking in his kitchen, happily stirring a pot, its contents clanking against the metal interior, when suddenly he was hit by an unexpected coughing fit. The spoon fell from his hands as he clenched his chest, unable to breathe. Feeling as if his ribs were collapsing in on themselves, he fell forwards into the kitchen counter, holding onto its edges with one hand to keep him steady as he dug into his pockets with the other, desperately searching for his handkerchief. In the next room, his girlfriend Juanita was startled by the inhuman guttural noises coming from the kitchen and ran over to see what was happening. She was shocked to see George bent over the counter, coughing violently into his handkerchief. She began to ask him what was wrong, but then went pale the moment she saw the handkerchief. It was covered in blood. George quickly tried to hide the evidence by shoving the blood-covered handkerchief into his pocket, but it was too late. Juanita had already seen it and was now persistent on taking him to the hospital. But George, despite barely being able to get a word out in between coughs that rattled his entire body, flatly refused.
What kind of normal person suddenly starts coughing up blood and thinks to himself, it'll sort itself out?
Yeah, well, out of all the words that I would use to describe George Decker, I don't think normal would be one of them.
Okay, well, whatever his deal is, he should get it checked out. He could have tuberculosis.
Oh, I mean, yeah, that's not a bad guess. Its early signs are much like the common cold, so it's common for most people to ignore them. That is until TB tightens its grip, the cough intensifies, and blood eventually comes with it. Even at that point, tuberculosis is generally treatable, but there are some far stranger conditions, like George's for example, where coughing blood can be a sign that it's already too late. Unwilling to ignore the red mark of death that her boyfriend had coughed up into his handkerchief, Juanita managed to drag George into his car and take him to the hospital. But by the time they made it to the emergency room, George's cough had died down to some extent, which only gave him more reason to try and convince Juanita that he wasn't in need of medical attention. He was adamant on making her believe that everything was all right and that they should just go back home. But Juanita wasn't budging, and soon upon entering, a nurse approached the couple to inquire about the reason behind their visit. George became hysterical and pushed the nurse as she came closer to inspect his condition, creating quite the spectacle that put Juanita in a pretty embarrassing spot.
Okay, this guy's sus as hell. He's hiding something. I'm calling it.
After George's tantrum, the hospital staff tried to assess his condition again by asking basic screening questions, but George remained non-cooperative. Everyone was just trying to help him, but to George, they all looked like obstacles. People who could potentially ruin his entire plan.
Ha! Plan! See, I knew it. What you hiding, George?
Plenty. And because of this, the medical staff mostly only talked to Juanita regarding his condition and suggested that they admit him for the night to observe. George, upon hearing this, refused right away and asked Juanita to take him back home. In the end, accepting defeat to his non-compliant behavior, doctors discharged him with antibiotics for an upper respiratory infection. Little did George know that his continuous resistance was only going to last so long. At home, the stubborn man took his meds and decided to rest. Over the next couple of days, despite continuing to take his medications, his condition only got worse. At first, Juanita thought that maybe the medicine was just taking its time to show any effect, but in reality, that wasn't the case at all. George's coughing fits grew in their intensity and frequency until he wasn't just coughing blood. His skin was beginning to turn blue. This is a symptom called
cyanosis.
Yeah. That's right, and it normally happens when the blood is not getting enough oxygen. Blood gains its red coloring from the oxygen-carrying red blood cells within it, and when it lacks oxygen, it develops more of a blue-purple color. This meant that there was a high chance that George's body was internally suffocating. As it became more and more apparent that George's condition wasn't going to improve on its own, Juanita eventually convinced him that he needed to quit all this waiting around and go back to the hospital because whatever secrets he had, they weren't really worth keeping if it was going to cost him his life. Back at the emergency room, seeing his rapidly deteriorating condition, the medical staff swiftly admitted George and conducted a chest x-ray to try and figure out what was happening. The results were shocking. His lungs were full of liquid.
He was drowning?
In pus.
Oh, yeah, duh. He's got pneumonia.
Indeed. This serious lung infection causes inflammation in the alveoli, the little air sacs in our lungs where oxygen from the air you breathe is transferred into the bloodstream. In the case of pneumonia, these alveoli are filled with pus that is released when the immune cells of the body die fighting against an intruding agent. You could say that pus is the dead bodies of your immune system's fallen soldiers.
I mean, thank you for your service, boys, but not only are your deaths in vain here, they're actively killing this guy.
Well, normally this wouldn't be an issue because the body can gradually empty the lungs of pus by coughing. In this case, however, the body had no way of knowing that what had contaminated George's alveoli could not be killed. And as the immune system sent more and more soldiers to the front line to die, the pus in his lungs would pile up at an increasingly unmanageable rate. In the medical field, pneumonia is a well-understood disease, so its diagnosis should have given doctors a clear path to treatment. Identify the suspect causing the infection, administer the right medication, and let the body do the rest. Pretty simple, right?
Right?
Wrong! Sorry to interrupt, but they couldn't find the culprit.
What do you mean they couldn't find it? It's pneumonia. There had to be some kind of bacterial or viral infection.
No, they found nothing. Not a single pathogen. His lungs were filled with inflammation, his body was fighting against something, but nobody could figure out what.
Okay, but hadn't he been taking those antibiotics the past few days? Maybe those had killed off the bacteria by now.
That couldn't be it, because if the bacteria was killed, then his condition should have been improving. And it wasn't.
Okay, well maybe they screwed up the tests.
Yeah, exactly my thought. There had to be a mistake, right? Well, to make sure they weren't missing something, they conducted repeated cultures of the sputum he coughed up. But the results came out negative each time. No streptococcus, no legionella, no influenza. The usual suspects were ruled out one by one, leaving the doctors clueless. As the weeks dragged on, George's health spiraled out of control. The pneumonia wasn't responding to any treatment. His once sporadic coughing fits became relentless, racking his entire body. Each one left him gasping for air, clutching his chest as if his lungs were collapsing in on themselves. And it only got worse. Soon his lungs began to thicken, a process called fibrosis. This means that instead of the lungs staying soft and spongy, the tissues become scarred and stiff. Think of it like a sponge turning into leather. It can't soak up air as easily. Now, Grill, do you know that there are cases in which pneumonia isn't caused by pathogens?
Yeah? Emphysema.
Warning. Intelligence levels suspiciously high. Detainment of imposter recommended.
What?
Okay, what is this, Grill? How do you know so much medical terminology all of a sudden?
Cough it up.
I started watching Grey's Anatomy, okay? But hey, it's not because of any of that nerdy science stuff, alright? I'm only watching it for the steamy romance.
Don't worry, Grill. I don't think you're the only one. And if you're going to watch it, I hope it's with a good pair of everyday earbuds by Raycon, this video's sponsor. It's my go-to choice of earbuds when I'm looking up medical mysteries and a perfect gift for Mother's Day.
Oh yeah, they're great.
When I'm staying up late, I love listening to a podcast as I peruse my next case. They've got active noise cancellation, which is great for drowning out noises to focus on, say, cooking something mysterious in a pot, or to block out when Grill and his band are playing at deafening levels.
Hey, we're not that loud.
The 32-hour battery life means I don't have to stop to recharge. And with quick charge, even 10 minutes gives me another hour and a half of peace. They're also weatherproof, which doesn't help me since I never leave the house, but I'm sure it would help if you're traveling for an adventure or just going on a run. Your earbuds won't short out in the rain. The multi-point connectivity is surprisingly useful, making it easy to switch from listening to music on your phone to watching Grey's Anatomy on your computer. The ergonomic design fits perfectly without slipping, which means when I inevitably nod off at my desk, it won't slip out. I got mine in this very sleek concrete-style protective case cover, a bit like a nuclear bunker for my earbuds that lets you charge wirelessly. And if they're not for you, there's a 30-day happiness guarantee return policy. No questions asked. So if you're heading into the field or into a rabbit hole of endless reading, you'll want a pair of Raycon everyday earbuds, especially as a Mother's Day gift. When you order Raycons, you're not just getting high-quality earbuds at half the price of other premium brands, you're also directly supporting our channel. So go to buyraycon.com/brew to get 20% off site-wide. Brought to you by Raycon. Let's get back to why we were talking about lungs in the first place. But you are right about emphysema being one of the causes of pneumonia without the presence of a pathogen. It happens when the tiny air sacs of our lungs gets damaged, and instead of many small sacs, they merge into larger, less efficient ones. But the major cause of emphysema is smoking, and George was never a smoker. In fact, his lungs, apart from the pneumonia, were surprisingly clean. Another potential cause was chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, or COPD, which is often linked to long-term exposure to pollutants, chemicals, or heavy dust. George had no history of exposure to such things, at least none that could explain this level of rapid lung destruction. Then there's pulmonary fibrosis, a disease where the lung tissue thickens and stiffens, making it harder to breathe over time. But that's a slow and progressive disease that develops over years, not weeks. And Unfortunately, that's where the doctors hit a dead end. The rate of fibrosis happening in George's lungs was way too fast. Within weeks, his lung tissue became stiff, almost like a rock. Every breath he took was a struggle. It was like trying to suck air through a straw with lungs filled with cement. It was a true nightmare for George. His skin, which had already started turning blue, was now a deep, sickly shade. When his vitals dipped into dangerous levels, the doctors had no choice but to put him on a ventilator. The doctors inserted a tube down George's throat, forcing oxygen directly into his lungs. From there, the machines took over his breathing while his body fought against whatever was shutting him down. But even with the most intensive care, George's condition did not improve. His lungs had hardened to the point that they wouldn't expand, even with a machine pumping oxygen into them. Then, after 3 long months of fighting, on October 14th, 1992, George Decker took his last ragged breath. Perhaps if the mysterious cause of his illness had been discovered, there could have been a way to save his life. But despite putting their heads together for months, doctors just couldn't put their finger on it.
What, that's it? No one figured it out?
Don't worry, Grill. Even though George was dead, the mystery behind his cause of death was still alive and well. And there was one tenacious detective who would do whatever it took to solve it before George took his secrets with him to his grave. 5 days after George's death, the hospital called a pathologist to perform his autopsy. A pathologist is a medical doctor who specializes in diagnosing diseases by studying tissues, blood, and body fluids. They are best known for performing autopsies and are often referred to as the final arbiter in understanding a patient's problem. The doctor they called, however, wasn't just any pathologist. He was Dr. Daniel C. Weaver, or as he refers to himself, one of the odd birds of medicine. He was known to resolve strange medical cases and would stop at nothing until he found the real cause behind unknown deaths.
Jeez, what is this guy, the Sherlock of the dead?
Well, you could say that. In fact, when he entered the hospital and looked through a foot-thick chart of George's medical profile, he said to himself, "Now, it was my job to find out why." Dr. Weaver stood above George's lifeless body, the cold, sterile room humming with the quiet whir of ventilation, the faint scent of formaldehyde lingering in the air. With a scalpel in hand, he made 3 long cuts along George's skin with great precision. One diagonal cut from each shoulder going downwards to the xiphoid process, which is a pointed cartilage at the bottom of the breastbone, and the 3rd cut from the intersection of those 2 cuts down to the pubic bone. This skillfully opened the whole torso.
Ugh, must you explain all this in such detail?
Don't be scared, Grill. That's just standard autopsy procedure.
Scared? I'm not scared, it's gross.
It's all perspective, my dear boy.
Did you just call me boy?
My dear man?
Somehow, that's worse.
Yeah, I felt that too. In any case, Dr. Weaver's main objective was to assess the lungs, so after the incisions, it was time to take them out. He first peeled back the cut skin and then removed the ribs, finally opening the chest to reveal the lungs. According to the doctor, as soon as he held them in his hands, it was obvious that this had been a hopeless plight. The lungs, usually as light and airy as cotton candy, were as heavy and thick as liver. After that, Dr. Weaver conducted a gross visual examination of George's body.
Oh, so you admit this is gross?
No, a gross examination is when a pathologist checks if there's any abnormality in the size, shape, and color of organs with their naked eye, aka macroscopic inspection as opposed to using a microscope, which was actually the next step where the real detective work begins. But in order to do that, he first had to select small pieces of each organ's tissue to be carefully preserved, sliced into ultra-thin sections, stained with special dyes, and placed into slides. And a few days later, when Dr. Weaver finally inspected George's lung tissues under his microscope, he made a shocking discovery.
God, I sure hope he did. Feels like I'm stuck in science class.
Well, you see, Grill, in healthy lungs, the tiny alveoli are surrounded by an intricate mesh of capillaries, with only a thin, delicate membrane separating air from the blood that carries oxygen to the rest of the body. The thinness of this membrane specifically allows for the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide between alveoli and blood to happen seamlessly. But in George's lungs, the pathologist found a completely different spectacle. Instead of those delicate membranes, Dr. Weaver saw a, quote, dense impenetrable thicket of debris, clot-forming proteins, inflammatory cells, and collagen, a cellular junkyard. There was no way for oxygen to cross such a thick barrier and reach the bloodstream. Similarly, carbon dioxide, which is a metabolic waste and can be toxic in high concentrations, had no way of getting out. His lungs were so stiff and burdened that his organs gasped for oxygen, but his blood remained empty.
So he drowned in air?
That's,
What? What'd he say?
It doesn't translate well. George had died from suffocation, but what led to the blockage was still unknown. Dr. Weaver conducted his own screening to detect any strains of bacteria, viruses, or fungi in the tissues, but just like the hospital staff, all his results came out negative. Dr. Weaver had hit a dead end, but that's when he did something all tenacious investigators do. He went back to the beginning. He pulled out George's hospital chart, scanning through pages of notes. His eyes peeled at every bit of information, looking for a clue, and finally, his efforts paid off. In the chart prepared by a third-year medical student on July 3rd, the day George was first admitted, Dr. Daniel found his first clue. Juanita's native language was Spanish, so the medical student, being bilingual, was able to have a thorough conversation with her and record her account of what happened. The report mentioned that George was in a fairly good mood while he was cooking in the kitchen, but everything changed the moment he got the coughing fits. He became grumpy and non-cooperative, hinting that whatever was affecting him, it wasn't just directly impacting his breath, but also his brain. Other symptoms like coughing up blood and the discoloration of skin were in correlation to any patient with pneumonia, but what piqued Dr. Weaver's interest was the rapid rate at which the events progressed. He understood that the causative agent must not be something they come across every day, and that George most likely came into contact with it when he was cooking in the kitchen. But the one person who witnessed everything, from George's first cough 3 months ago to his last breath, was Juanita. She was the core element who could help in finding the answers to this unresolved mystery. But mysteriously, she was nowhere to be found, and he had no way of contacting her. It was almost as if she vanished after George's death. He was going to have to think outside the box. Lucky for Dr. Weaver, he stumbled across another name who might be able to provide some valuable information. On the first page of the medical report was George's employer's name, Mr. Wilson. Dr. Weaver gave Mr. Wilson a call. When the line connected, the doctor calmly introduced himself as the medical examiner investigating the cause behind George's death. Mr. Wilson hesitated before responding. It was almost as if he knew what Dr. Weaver was about to ask, before he had even mentioned anything. Fortunately, Mr. Wilson agreed to answer his questions anyway. The conversation went like this. What exactly did George do at your shop? Actually, Grill, can you read Mr. Wilson's lines? It's easier if it's, yeah.
Okay. He poured aluminum ingots.
And what kind of guy was George?
Oh, he was a fella on his way to Mucho Dinero. Mucho Dinero? What's a big diner got to do with anything?
Mucho dinero is Spanish for big money.
Oh, okay.
Well, how did he get mucho dinero? The ways Mr. Decker used, were they on the up and up?
You could say no.
By now, Dr. Daniel had a strong hunch of what might have been happening with George. He remembered how Juanita had mentioned that George was cooking something right before he suddenly got sick. So, the doctor asked the pressing question. Do you know what he was cooking?
No, not exactly.
Well then, do you know how he got his money besides by pouring aluminum ingots?
Bro, what am I supposed to do here? It just says long pause.
There was no answer. It looked like Mr. Wilson was struggling to decide whether he should reveal George's secret side hustle or not. After a long pause, he finally responded.
Oh, right. George collected old fillings from dentist offices and extracted the gold and silver. Wait, hold on. Fillings? Like for people's teeth?
What did he do with the metal?
I don't know, but bro, was he cooking teeth?
Precisely. He was extracting gold and silver by melting them out of fillings of old teeth. Once again, Mr. Wilson gave a vague response, but shared another piece of information that seemed strangely irrelevant. He mentioned that in the past year alone, George and his girlfriend had taken 3 vacations to Colombia.
Yeah, that's not suspicious at all.
Dr. Weaver thought that as well. Colombia does have an unfortunate reputation for clandestine deals and trades of the illicit variety, so there could be something else brewing under the guise of vacation. But Dr. Weaver wasn't sure what to make of that intel just yet. But then, he asked one final question, one that could tie everything together. Did George use drugs?
I personally never saw Decker use drugs. Okay.
That was it. Dr. Daniel had been lied to plenty of times in his life, and that was a textbook dodge. In his words, the man was a regular Henry Kissinger. It was all the confirmation I needed. The case was finally coming together. He figured out George's sneaky side quest, extracting the gold and silver in dental fillings with his metal shop skills. And the frequent trips to Colombia? He was probably going there to exchange the precious metals for narcotics. But how was it all connected to his rapid decline in health? That's when Dr. Weaver decided to hit the source. He called a dental laboratory to inquire about dental fillings. Eventually, he found the missing piece to this puzzle. The dentist explained that gold fillings aren't pure gold but mixed with palladium and other metals. Gold itself is too soft to survive the hard crushing and grinding of teeth. Heating it with other metals like palladium in proper proportions creates a tough alloy at the end. That end product is not only resistant to tears, but also survives the acidic conditions of the mouth. Simultaneously, reheating the alloy would separate the metals due to the difference in their melting points. George, with his knowledge as a metal shop laborer, must have known that the melting temperature for gold is much lower than that of palladium. This means, upon heating, gold in the teeth would melt out first and could easily be separated from the rest of the metals. Now, gold is harmless in its pure form, and had George only stuck to cooking teeth with metal fillings, he would have been fine. But he soon got infected by the most deadly virus of all: greed. Gold fillings are more expensive and, thus, hard to find, whereas silver fillings are more abundant. As the dentist informed Dr. Daniel, silver fillings were an amalgam of silver and a potentially deadly metal: Mercury.
The planet?
No.
The god?
No.
Freddy?
Do you honestly think that the silver fillings are being made with the deceased lead singer of Queen?
No, but you sure have fun to mess with.
Mercury, the metal, also nicknamed Quicksilver, is one of the most toxic metals in the world. It is a naturally occurring element found in various forms: elemental mercury, organic, and inorganic mercury. Exposure to it, even in small amounts, can be highly dangerous as it accumulates over time, causing severe health risks to the immune, digestive, and nervous systems, which could explain the mood swings George had. Naturally occurring mercury, released into the air through volcanic eruptions and soil erosion, is scarce. But human activities like burning coal, mining, and industrial waste have drastically increased its presence. Once released, mercury cycles through the air, water, and soil, contaminating fish, wildlife, and even drinking water. For a terrifying example of just how catastrophic mercury contamination can be on a large scale, just look to the Minamata Bay disaster. For generations, life in the quiet fishing town of Minamata, Japan, revolved around the sea. Most residents were fishermen who made their living from the bay and gathered around dinner tables to enjoy the fruit of their daily hard work. But all that changed forever in 1932, when Chiso Corporation, a powerful chemical company, began dumping methyl mercury, the deadliest form of mercury, directly into Minamata Bay. The factory's wastewater flowed freely into the sea, carrying the invisible poison with it. At first, no one noticed because the mercury had no smell, no taste, and no warning signs. But inside the fish and shellfish that made up the local diet, the deadly toxin had been accumulating. After about 2 decades of chemical dumping, the enemy finally made itself known. The cats of Minamata were the first to suffer. They began to exhibit erratic behavior, staggering, twitching, and suddenly jumping into the sea as if possessed. Locals called it dancing cat disease. Then, birds started falling from the sky, their wings frozen mid-flight. Dogs foamed at the mouth and collapsed. No one could understand what was happening. And soon, it was the townspeople's turn. A strange illness began appearing among them. It started with small, almost unnoticeable symptoms: numbness in the hands and feet, difficulty walking, and slurred speech. By the early 1950s, the disease became the town's worst nightmare. Victims lost control of their limbs, their bodies twisting in painful contortions. Children were unable to stand. Adults convulsed in agony. Some screamed of terrifying hallucinations. Others went mad before falling into comas, never to wake again. The sea, which had once given life, was now claiming it. As the death toll rose, the town's doctors and scientists raced for answers. In 1956, the first official case of what would be called Minamata disease was diagnosed. But by that time, the damage was already catastrophic. More than 50,000 people were affected, either paralyzed, blind, or unable to speak. Many infants were born with severe neurological disabilities. Entire families were wiped out. And the worst part was the victims didn't even know they were being poisoned. They had been eating the same fish their ancestors had relied on for centuries. Only now, each bite was laced with a death sentence. And here's where things get interesting. The Chiso Corporation knew about mercury pollution long before the government acknowledged it. But instead of stopping it, they hid the truth. They completely denied any responsibility and instead bribed scientists to publish false reports that the disease was caused by an unknown virus. They even paid off affected families with small sums of money and forced them to sign contracts stating they would never sue. For years, Chiso Corporation worked tirelessly to suppress the truth while the people of Minamata suffered and died in silence.
All that just so they could keep dumping crap in the ocean. Were they ever even held accountable?
It took over a decade for the truth to come out. In 1968, the Japanese government finally admitted that the disease was caused by mercury poisoning from Chiso's factory, but the fight for justice had only begun. Survivors and their families immediately took Chiso to court, demanding accountability. The company, however, kept its stance and fought back viciously, dragging the victims through years of legal battles. In 1973, however, the people of Minamata won a landmark case. Chiso was finally forced to pay a large one-time consolation payment to the certified victims. At the time, the settlement amounted to about $66,000, but many felt it was inadequate for the extent of the harm caused. Consequently, in the years that followed, victims and their families continued to file lawsuits against Chiso and the Japanese government. They demanded better compensatory measures for the deaths of thousands. The corporation continued to fight the multiple cases in court. It wasn't until 2004 that the Supreme Court of Japan finally held the government liable for negligence in regulating industrial pollution that led to Minamata disease. The court ordered the government to pay $703,000 in damages. Even so, many believed that no amount of money could compensate for the decades of suffering, deformities, and death. The toxic legacy of Chiso's mercury dumping still lingers in the water, in the soil, and in the people's memories. Although the disaster forced Japan to change its environmental policies, leading to stricter pollution laws, it all came at an unimaginable cost.
Okay, if mercury's so deadly, why are dentists putting it in people's mouths?
Well, mercury had a unique property that sets it apart from other metals. It's liquid at room temperature. The mercury in dental fillings is in liquid form, which is fairly non-toxic. In fact, people have ingested ounces of the chemical with no effect. This is because mercury, due to its high surface tension, tends to ball up when ingested. This dramatically reduces the surface area that would come in contact with the body. The real villain is its gaseous state, which is released when mercury is heated past its melting point. Just like a silent killer, it's odorless, colorless, and extremely toxic.
Okay, well, many people, including you, love drinking the hot beverages, so won't the fillings be dangerous then?
Well, I'm pretty sure no one is drinking something above 356 degrees Celsius, which is the boiling point of mercury, so I think they're fine. When cooking teeth to extract silver from the fillings, the silver would have only become liquid at over 900 degrees Celsius, so George would have evaporated the mercury well before any silver would have melted. You want to know the craziest thing about all this, though?
What?
This isn't even the last time something like this happened.
Seriously? Someone else was dumb enough to do this?
Yep. George's case occurred in 1992. Luckily, the only casualty was him. However, in 2019, a 51-year-old man in Rhode Island tried the same stunt. But in his case, he poisoned his entire building. The culprit had fallen ill 3 days after cooking teeth and turning his apartment into a mercury gas chamber, eventually seeking help at St. Anne's Hospital. But his condition worsened, and he was transferred to Rhode Island Hospital, where, unlike in George's story, doctors thankfully realized that he had mercury poisoning. By the time authorities were alerted, the damage had already spread far beyond his apartment. Firefighters and hazmat teams arrived to assess the scene, only to discover dangerous levels of mercury not just in his unit, but in the common areas of the building as well. As a result, a 17-year-old girl and her mother living in the apartment also fell victim to mercury poisoning and were placed under quarantine at the hospital. But the most immediate victims were the helpless pets in the building. A dog and 2 cats in the apartment succumbed to the poison, their small bodies unable to withstand the mercury fumes that had settled onto the floors. In the end, the entire building was deemed uninhabitable.
Okay, I know you said that putting mercury in people's teeth was safe or whatever, but I don't know. Can we just not?
Well, Grill, you're not the only one who thinks this way. Keeping multiple safety concerns in view, 43 countries, including Sweden, the Philippines, and the entire European Union, banned the use of mercury-silver dental amalgams. Meanwhile, in North America, it's open season, which in the end is quite strange, especially when you consider that in these same countries where its use is legal, after the mercury-silver amalgam is placed in the tooth, dental assistants are required by law to treat any unused amalgam as hazardous waste and thus following particular handling precautions and disposal procedures.
So what? The only safe place to put this crap is in people's mouths? How does that make any sense?
Yeah, the logic is almost paradoxical, isn't it? But you know what does make logical sense? Hitting the like button and subscribing to our channel if you enjoyed this video, as it really helps us to keep bringing more stories to you. Like this one about two women who killed a man in an airport for a YouTube video. They swear that it was all just a prank, but how could that be? Well, they had quite the story to go along with it. And don't forget to go to buyraycon.com/brew to get 20% off site-wide and get a pair for your mother this Mother's Day.